Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be recapping week 24 of the Overwatch League season. It was the final week of the regular season in the West as well as the play-ins for the APAC region. And so we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about what happened. I'm going to start with the recap where I ended with the predictions, which is the APAC play-ins. Those games were of course the ones with the bigger implications this weekend. There were some things still up for grabs with the playoffs in the West in terms of like seeding and positioning and stuff like that. But I want to talk about the play-ins first because those are the bigger games this weekend. And boy, did they not go at all how I expected them to. For the play-ins, I predicted the Guangzhou Charge to go the distance with the Chengdu Hunters, but come out on top and then win 3-0 against the Hangzhou Spark. And none of that happened. I guess the Guangzhou Charge did go the distance against Chengdu Hunters, but it was actually the Chengdu Hunters who came out victorious in that series. They reverse sweep over the Guangzhou Charge. And then in the finals for the play-ins, the Hangzhou Spark 3-0 victory over the Chengdu Hunters. And this is really ironic because on paper, none of this is that surprising, right? Chengdu versus Guangzhou, they were very close together in terms of seeding, in terms of record. Chengdu had the better record for most of the season. Guangzhou passes them or ties them with record, has that extra tournament point from the Summer Showdown, so they're the higher seed, but it goes the distance. Chengdu comes out on top. But then Hangzhou, who are the 4 seed, end up victorious and going in. But when you look at the path that these teams have had in the second half of the season, it's pretty interesting. The Guangzhou Charge in the second half of the season were 8-4. Which is tied for the 4th best record in the entire Overwatch League in the second half of the season. They're tied with the LA Gladiators and the San Francisco Shock, 8-4 in the second half of the season. Behind only the Dallas Fuel, who are 11-1, the Seoul Dynasty were 10-2, and the Shanghai Dragons, who were 9-3. So a very good second half of the season for the Guangzhou Charge that just does not actually end well for them in the play-ins. Chengdu Hunters on their side were also not a very good team in terms of their overall performance in the second half of the year either. Neither were the Hangzhou Spark, but the Chengdu Hunters, a little bit better of a performance from them in the second half of the season. 4-8 overall record after going 2-4 in both the Summer Showdown and the Countdown Cup. The Hangzhou Spark were 2-10 in the second half of the season. So thinking the Guangzhou Charge would have won, despite the fact that they, record-wise, were not as high as the Hangzhou Spark and were, ever so slightly ahead of the Chengdu Hunters, there was a reason why a lot of people expected the Guangzhou Charge to win. The Hangzhou Spark winning is a really interesting thing to look at because they were not a high-performing team for the majority of this second half of the season. They struggled a lot, but Shy looked really, really good, and so long as Shy looks good, I think the Spark can do something. Definitely a team I don't have a ton of confidence in going into the playoffs, but they showed up when they needed to. They won the most important game they have played all season, and they qualified for the playoffs. Disappointing end of the season for the Guangzhou Charge. They played very, very well that second half of the year. Went from 1 win in the first half to a 9-win season total, but it just was not there in the play-ins. Leave played very, very well in that matchup, and that was really kind of the thing that ended up costing the Charge. Also, a very good performance from Gaga as well when he came in on map 3 and managed to turn it for the Chengdu Hunters with his presence. So the APAC play-ins, definitely a bit of a surprise that the Hangzhou Spark made it in. Even though they were, like I said, the 4 seed in the region, they still managed to come out on top in a bit of a shocking result. Moving on now to the West, let's throw up my picks from last week. Not terrible, 5-3 overall for last week, 1-1 in big picks. So my overall final season big pick record, 14-18, 43.75% on big picks. My weakest big picks by far. This season was tough to predict. I think a lot of it comes down to just the fact that the game changed so rapidly from stage to stage, tournament to tournament. We didn't really have our hands on the game for a lot of the time, so it was really tough to kind of see where things would be. I think there were a lot of teams that exceeded our expectations and some that disappointed more than we expected them to. My overall percentage, 64.58%. I do want to say last week I fixed where I was at. I actually was 12 games short that I was supposed to have. I don't know how I did that, but this number of 155 and 85 should be correct based on my calculation. So 64.58%. Once again, my weakest season in that, but better than my big picks at the very least. So that is good to say. Like I said earlier, this week wasn't really the biggest in terms of overall kind of playoff qualifications. Everyone had locked in their spot for, at the very least, the play-ins in the West. There was one playoff spot up for grabs, and London was the team fighting for that. If they won their game against New York, they would have qualified for the playoffs. That was the first game of the weekend, and the London Spitfire got the job done. 3-1 victory over the New York Excelsior qualified them for the playoffs. They could have moved up in seeding from the 6 seed to the 5 seed if they were able to beat the Shock on Saturday. That did not happen. The Spitfire did not manage the upset. It was close, though. It was a 3-2 game for the Shock in that one, but ultimately it was the Spitfire who took that one away against the Excelsior, but failed against the Shock. Spitfire do qualify for the playoffs. I believe they are the 6th seed, which I talked about last week, because the Atlanta Reign have a better win percentage in the playoffs. That kind of offsets their slightly weaker win percentage in the regular season. So it's all complicated and confusing. I'm sure after next week, after the play-ins, we'll have an actual bracket for the playoffs, so we know exactly what everyone's seeding is. But Spitfire managed to lock up a top 6 spot. Impressive for a team that a lot of people did not have very high in their power rankings. I don't remember where exactly I had them. I definitely had them pretty low. I may have had them 19th. I think I had them, or at least 13th in the West. I think I had them as the weakest team coming out of the West. But they performed far better than I expected them to do. I think Christopher did a great job coaching this team this year, and I think that they are definitely deserving of the spot they have right now. San Francisco Shock had to play the Paris Eternal. Obviously, they were going to win that game. No questions about it. Eternal do not look very good. It was an easy win for them. Eternal just do not look as good as what you would kind of want from them. They've struggled a lot, obviously, new roster. This new roster did not manage to find any wins, but they had their moments. But ultimately, the Shock, of course, are not a great team to try to get your first win against in this kind of new roster for the Eternal. And so the Shock, it's been messy this second half of the season, especially this tournament in particular, but they managed to pull it out when they needed to, and they are victorious at the end of the day, and that really is all you can ask for when you're a team fighting for playoff seeding, which they did manage by the end of the week to lock up the number 2 overall seed in the playoffs. Dallas, of course, as the number 1 seed in the world. Florida Mayhem with a big win over the Toronto Defiant. Shocking. I think the Mayhem had the best weekend of any team. They went 2-0 with victories over the Defiant and the Outlaws. Definitely not what I was expecting to talk about. I thought the Mayhem have been a somewhat rocky team at times this season, but since the Summer Showdown, I think they have looked significantly better. They got some great wins over the past week. They won last week a game against Vancouver that I don't think people expected them to win, or that they were down early and they managed to come back and win that one. This big win this weekend against Toronto and against Houston. Other very good wins. They are not a team to sleep on. I think they look very good. They look consistently strong, and I think that really is the thing that is going to be the key for this Mayhem roster going forward. If they can keep winning these games, they have a very real chance of making a pretty good push for the postseason, right? They are going to play in the play-ins. They go into the play-ins as the highest seed in the play-ins, which pretty good for them, all things considered. Definitely a spot you would like to be in if you are the Mayhem. Going in as the 9 seed or the 7 seed, I guess is what they are, the 7 seed, is pretty good. And it means that you are in a good enough spot where you have a very real shot at causing some damage and doing something to potentially knock a team off and find yourself in a spot to potentially win the entire play-in tournament, get that spot. I think right now they are probably my favorite in the Western play-ins to make it. I think they look the best right now. They're playing very, very well. Hydron has been unbelievable on the Sojourn, and he has really done a lot to put this team in prime position to get a win in the play-ins. It's tough to really kind of judge Houston and Toronto, and I'm going to kind of throw them, both of those Florida games together for this one, because I think it really is just kind of the same thing, where with Houston, I don't know how much they were really putting into the games this weekend. They couldn't really change their seeding in any way, shape, or form. Not just they really couldn't. They couldn't at all. There was no way they could change their seeding. So I think that they probably were not really going as hard this week, because I think their focus was more on preparing for the playoff meta, scrimming the playoff patch, scrimming the live game, as opposed to what they've been kind of playing in matches, because I don't think there's any reason to, if you're the Outlaws, to kind of do that. The Defiant, though, have been fighting for a lot. They've been fighting for a better seeding. They wanted to try to pass Florida, right? If they beat Florida, they could have put themselves in the better position. They would have to play Boston instead of having to play Washington. They could have had the higher seed in the play-ins, potentially then the higher seed in the playoffs. I don't think it really matters at the end of the day that much. They still finish as the 8 seed in the West, so they're still the 2nd seed in the play-ins, but they definitely had more to fight for here, and the Mayhem just made them look weak. And the Mayhem looked very, very good. I think that when you look at what the Mayhem have done and you look at how good they look now, if there's ever a time you need to look good as the Mayhem, it is right now. You need to be playing well now, towards the end of the season when the playoffs are coming around, because you want to be good when the games matter the most. And that is really what we are seeing with the Mayhem. So I feel very, very happy with what I've seen from them and think they look pretty good going forward. I talked about the Shock beating the Spitfire before, but that was a big win for the Shock to get that number 2 seed. That put them ahead of the Gladiators and the Dynasty to lock in that 2 seed. They needed that win because it really was a difference for them between, winning one game would have put them as the 3, winning both games put them in as the 2. That was a huge boon for them, and the real thing they needed to kind of put themselves in prime position to at least get a selection of opponent in the playoffs and get the better selection of opponent in the playoffs. So good win for them, but also an impressive showing from the Spitfire. I feel pretty good about the Spitfire. They looked better than I would have expected them to, and so they're a team that I think is in a good position right now to potentially make a decent dark horse run in the playoffs. Boston Uprising beat the New York Excelsior. Not much to talk about here. Boston, looking for whatever victories they can, more for moral victories than anything else. They couldn't move their spot up or down in the play-ins. They were guaranteed the bottom spot in the play-ins, so that wasn't going to change at all. But a win is good. Put yourself in a good position as a team, gives you a morale boost. Winning games at any point in time is always a good thing if you're a team like the Uprising, who've been kind of struggling a bit. They finished the season with 10 wins, spoilers, which is honestly quite impressive for a team that hasn't looked incredible all season. They had a very good Countdown Cup, put themselves in a good position. It was 4-2 qualifiers from them, 4-2 stage from them, and so they put themselves in a very good position going into play-ins. They look good, and I think they have the potential to upset some of these other teams in the tournament. I think they do look good enough right now that I would not write them off yet. I talked about the Mayhem Outlaws game. Mayhem needed a win. Outlaws didn't really need it. So good win from the Mayhem. Outlaws I don't think have been trying as hard because of the fact that they can't move up in qualifications, but thought it was an interesting game and definitely one that I did not expect to be as one-sided as it was. Uprising beat the Eternal. Once again, Uprising don't really need these wins, but it's good for them. It helps them out. Eternal struggled to get anything done, really. They have not looked great all season. They've just been struggling. Did not think they'd be the worst team this season after what we saw from them last season. Obviously, they blew up their roster after the midseason madness, or I guess it was really at the start of the summer showdown. They blew up their roster. So it's disappointing to see what the Eternal did, and it's disappointing to see the Eternal roster struggle the way it did, but unfortunately, that's just the way things go, and this team's season ends on a very low note. But the Uprising, getting a good win, puts themselves in not incredible position going into the play-ins in terms of standings, but in terms of performance, I feel way better about them now than I did when they were, going into the Countdown Cup. Final match of the weekend was the Toronto Defiant versus the Houston Outlaws. The Defiant pulled out the win in a game that I think a lot of people would consider to some degree an upset. Like I said, Houston, what are they playing for? It's not as much. But this game in particular, Toronto wasn't really playing for much either because they couldn't move up or down in the standings either. You know, they were guaranteed to be the, you know, after the Mayhem win over the Outlaws, the Defiant couldn't move up or down. They were going to be the second seed going to the play-ins. It was impossible for them to pass the Mayhem at that point in time. And so what did they have to play for other than pride? But I think when you look at the Defiant, they did not have a very good qualifier this go-around. They looked pretty weak. And so I think it was important for them to have a good showing and a good outing where they actually played well and looked like a good, well-rounded, competent team that really had their stuff together going into the play-ins. And I think they needed a good showing to kind of boost their confidence and look good going up against a good opponent in the Houston Outlaws, right? The next weekend is really, really important for this Defiant roster. The Outlaws don't really care. They're going to go home and they're going to start scrimming for the playoff patch because they're on the playoff patch now. They're in the playoffs. They know they're in the playoffs. They've known they've been in the playoffs for like 2 weeks now. So I don't think they really have the same level of care about these, you know, matches. Don't really mean a whole lot to them at this point in time when they've already locked in their positioning and their seeding and nothing can change for the Outlaws. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what happens over time, if the Outlaws improve going into the playoffs or not. But I think the Defiant getting a win is a good statement for a team that goes into the play-ins looking to lock in a spot in the playoffs, where they might find themselves competing with the likes of the Mayhem and the Justice and the Uprising, who have been up and down this season. But right now, the Mayhem, the Uprising look very, very good. And the Justice are always a team that you cannot sleep on because they have a superstar in their DPS line with Decay. So that's it for my recap. We'll talk about standings, I think, next week when we have the full playoff bracket revealed. I believe, though, the Western region is, of course, Dallas Fuel number 1 with Shock number 2. Then it's the Gladiators at 3, the Outlaws at 4, the Atlanta Reign at 5, and the London Spitfire at 6. And then in the East, of course, it's the Dynasty, Dragons, Fusion, Spark in that order. But we'll have a full look at the playoff bracket after the play-ins next weekend. So for now, I will wait until then. But that is going to be all for today. Hope you're all doing well. If you enjoyed this video, want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. Comment down below your thoughts on what happened this past week. But that's going to be all. Thank you all once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.